Hello everyone. So today we're talking about the documentaries that we all watched over the weekend, and the documentary that I chose to watch was The Working Poor, the one that was on YouTube. The documentary that I watched, The Working Poor, was basically about there was like three different like families or like people that we like in the movie or like in the documentary that you kind of like follow around and you kind of see their living situation, and they kind of like talk about like what got them into those poor like living situations, and then at the end of the documentary we kind of see like where they ended up months after. um so I would say the main like social problem in my video in the documentary that I watched was definitely like kind of how hard it is to keep up with the US economy, and how hard it is to like get to a good place and then stay there in the US economy. Because as we all know, like prices for things are going up, bigger businesses are really starting to like take control. And once you get to the bottom, it's hard to get to the top. It's hard to like work your way back up. So I would say that's the biggest like social problem they were talking about, is how bigger businesses can kind of control a lot and how hard it is to like keep up with the US economy. Like no matter how much you're working, just how hard it is to like keep up with it once you fall behind. So in the video, it talks a lot about the working poor. That's the like name of it. But in the video, it kind of discusses how more of the middle class is slowly like turning into the working poor, where basically like you have to work so much to be able to like keep up with your life. There isn't really like a middle class, is kind of what they're saying. It's like saying, oh, the middle class is turning into like there is no comfortable living anymore. It's either you're uncomfortable or you're overly comfortable and you're rich. So that's kind of what it's like saying, is how like there isn't really like we're losing that balance. That's kind of like what the main video is about. So the first person that we follow is a young woman. She has two kids. She lives with her two kids and her mom. Her mom comes and helps her, and they live in a motel in California, I think it was. And she, at one point in the video, she said she had $8 to her name. $8 to her name. She works like, I think she said she works like 3 different jobs. She gets to see her kids for like 2 or 4 hours a day, depending on the day. And other than that, they were just with their grandma because she was just constantly working. And even though she was like constantly working, she still wasn't making enough money to be able to like keep up with being able to live in a house, and of like provide enough for her family to be able to like get them to a better place. And also in the video, it talks about a lot of these people are struggling since the recession, when the US like hit a recession. A lot of these people hit rock bottom at the recession, and then we're having a hard time like working our way back up. And so that's kind of like the main thing that it's like talking about, is how people are struggling since the recession. And a lot of it also is showing like no matter how hard you're working, it's still like you're not being able to get enough money to get to the top. So by the end of the video, the woman ended up getting a family aid program, and they found an apartment for her, but she still had to like pay off the down payment for the apartment later. But she did find a place. She did find a home for her family, so that was good. And then the next family that was in the video was a guy named Joe. He has 2 kids and a wife, and at the beginning of the video, they started off living in these tents because they used to have enough money. They used to be a comfortable family, and they lost their jobs. They didn't get their good paying jobs anymore, and so they weren't making enough income anymore to be able to keep up with the economy. So they ended up living in a church parking lot in tents. And the biggest thing that we kind of like saw with Joe's family that like kind of represented the US is how willing Joe was to work. He would wake up at 4:45 every single morning, and he would go to this job where they would like, if you made it and they had jobs for you when you got there, it was like a construction type thing. And if they had something for you when you got there, then you got to go do that job and you would get paid that day. But if all the jobs were taken by the time you got there, then you weren't getting paid that day. And it kind of showed like how people are willing to work and they want to work, and it's not that it's like people are lazy and that's why they're not making money and that's why they're falling behind. It's people are not getting paid enough to be able to keep up with the economy anymore. The minimum wage I know is like 11 something, and genuinely that is not enough to be able to afford good housing, provide for a family, like provide for yourself and maybe like another person. Like that's just not enough money these days with prices constantly increasing and stuff like that. So that's kind of the main thing that we saw with Joe's family, is how people are willing to work, but it still isn't enough. It's not that people are lazy. And the biggest thing that Joe was saying was like, and his wife were saying, is like, the rich are just getting richer and the poor are just getting poorer, because the rich are not willing to like, it's like almost like there's like this view that like once you get to the bottom, you're almost viewed as like less than. So people refuse to hire you to be able to get back on top. Like it's like once you get to the bottom, it's like, oh, you must be unwilling to work. You must have bad work ethic. And people are unwilling to provide better resources for people who are already at the bottom because, oh, they're there for a reason type like thing. It's like, it's hard to get out of the bottom once you get there, because people view you as a bottom and they don't think that you are capable of being on top. So you won't get hired at jobs. You won't get the opportunities that you should be getting and that you probably are capable of because people just view you as less than. That's kind of their bigger thing, is like the rich just look down on the poor and they are unwilling to accept them and let them come to the top. That's kind of what his view was. And then the third story that we kind of followed was a man who worked at General Energy. He worked there for 13 years. He was very comfortable, had a good income, and then all of a sudden General Energy wanted to make more profit, and so their way of making more profit was laying off like over 100 employees so that they didn't have to pay people anymore, because they didn't need them anymore. They didn't technically need them to be able to do their job, so they just fired a bunch of people and said, you're on your own now, figure it out. I think they said they would pay them for like 6 more months. They'd get half their wages for like 6 more months, and then they were on their own. And the big one was kind of showing us how bigger businesses have so much control over the economy, because they can just say, well, we'll take you, and for X amount of years, but the second that we want to start making more money, you're gone because we don't want to pay you anymore. That's kind of the biggest, like, they were really talking about how, like, bigger companies have so much control and how the government, like, won't step in and help, because there are unions are a thing where they kind of help support people and workers and stuff, but people kind of have this perception of like, if you join a union and if you make a union, the business will see that and they won't like that there's a union being formed, so they'll pack up and move and leave, because that has happened. Businesses, the second they see a union starting being formed, and now their workers are going to be wanting more, people are going to be sticking up for their pay, like, then they're like, okay, we got to go. So that's kind of the perception of starting a union. So people get scared to join unions and start unions so that they can start advocating for themselves. So bigger businesses have such control over people in their minds. And so that's kind of one of the things that they were talking about with his, is like these bigger businesses took advantage of the recession and of the workers and used that as a way, like, well, ever since the recession, we need to make more profit. We need to make more profit, even though they were doing just fine, so they fired a bunch of people. Some of the institutions that I found throughout the documentary, one of them that were being affected in my video were families are being affected because they were unable to provide for their kids. They were living in poor living conditions, like they weren't getting the help that they needed, stuff like that. And then another one is obviously economics, because people are working so many hours and not getting paid enough to be able to keep up with the economy. So we are losing the middle class. We are losing the people who are going, because you just have the poor who can't buy anything, and then you have the rich who buy unnecessary things from different countries because that's cool, and like are buying luxury items, and we don't have people just buying the average items and average things in the economy that we need to keep our economy going. So we're losing the middle class, and the middle class is what keeps our economy stable. So economics was a big thing that was being affected in my documentary. And then politics was also one that I found, because they kind of were talking about how governments are not stepping in and stopping these businesses when they are treating people poorly, not paying them enough. Like the government is not taking a big enough stance in helping support and like fix the economy with the people, you know what I mean? So, and some manifest and latent factors that I found, some manifest destiny factors were some of the things that they knew were going to happen after the recession were people were going to have a hard time getting back on their feet. It was going to be tricky. People were probably going to be getting paid less, like that was expected. But what they weren't expecting was how big companies were going to feed off of the recession and use it to their advantage to pay workers less and lay more people off so that they could make more profit for their company when they didn't actually need it. Some help that they talked about and discussed in the video were shelters. That one family, Joe's family, they did go to a shelter for 6 months. They got a 6-month period to go into a shelter, figure out their life. They ended up not figuring it out, and they did go back to the church tents. But shelters are a big one. In the video, they talked about a certain shelter where they had 6 months, and that gives people a chance to get back on their feet. And if they don't find a place and they don't get a job, then they lose the space at the shelter, and someone else can come in, and they have to go back to where they were. This can be good and bad because people are getting help, but then people are getting sent back out on the streets if they don't make that time period. So it's like you're giving people a chance to get on their feet, but then when they don't, they go back out. So, but I'm sure a lot of the times people do start to figure things out, but 6 months is kind of hard to get a job, work at a job long enough to be able to find a place. So I think maybe adjusting the time period at those shelters would be a good idea. But another thing that they talk about is family aid programs, like what the first family got when they got an apartment. Is the family aid programs will give them money, they'll pay for certain things, they'll pay for stuff, but then eventually, now that they're on their feet, they have to pay that back at some point. But it's just a good way to give families a better living situation, because when you have kids, like your kids do deserve, a genuine room, like actual food, not just junk food, like. So the family aid programs are really helpful. It's just having to pay them back, obviously. It can be hard, but they're still getting a lot of help. So this can be really good. But I think like one of the biggest things is just people being willing to hire people who maybe don't seem qualified because they aren't currently employed or they don't have the best history, but just giving people a chance to get a job. I think that's the biggest thing. And big businesses not just cutting out jobs for everyone. So to end all of that and to wrap it all up, my question that I have is, how can the government possibly intervene in these situations to stop big businesses from taking advantage of their employees? And what are some outcomes that can happen if we don't find a way to control these big businesses before it is too late? So that is my question to kind of wrap everything up.